much, Christine. As Christine said, my name is Nadia Laurinci, and I'm very excited to have fantastic speakers with us today. We have Alex Budka joining us from Stockholm. We have Kalsoom Lakhani joining us here in Washington, D.C. I'm in D.C. as well. And then we have Christine in Basel, Switzerland. So it's a truly international team, which is very exciting for me in the spirit of Thought for Food, where we are trying to engage students from around the world to help us think about how we can together resolve the challenge of how we're going to feed the world's 9 billion people by 2050. We have some exciting questions for our speakers today who are going to help us think about what it means to be a social entrepreneur. We've been hearing from many students who are trying to understand how they can come up with a powerful business idea that is going to be profitable and here for the long term, but also at the same time make a positive impact on society. And so I'm going to kick things off by briefly introducing Alex and Kalsoom, and then ask them to take us a little kind of a step back and tell us from their experience what motivated them to become a social entrepreneur and what their companies are trying to resolve. So Alex, thanks again for joining us. I hope you're having a nice time in Sweden. So Alex started a fantastic company. It is called StartSomeGood. He took the concept of crowdfunding, which you may be familiar with from platforms like Kickstarter and Indiegogo. It's an idea of being able to raise small amounts of money from large crowds to support projects. And he decided to customize this concept to empower the social entrepreneurs, so that when you have a social business idea, you can set up your project on the StartSomeGood website. You can create your following, you can nurture your community and raise capital along the way. And Kalsoom's company, it's called Invest to Innovate. It's a company that was set up to support early stage social entrepreneurs around the world, particularly in emerging markets. Kalsoom has done amazing work, particularly in Pakistan, and has empowered social entrepreneurs around the world to help them strengthen their companies and help them access funding. So thank you guys for joining us today.
Thank you.
Okay. So let's start with you, Alex. Can you tell us a little bit about your background, when you started thinking about social entrepreneurship, what social entrepreneurship means to you, and kind of share some of your advice that we could then pass along to students?
Absolutely. Well, first of all, thank you for having me today. It's really a pleasure to be here with all of you, especially alongside my friend Kalsoom, who's one of my very favorite social entrepreneurs out there.
Aw, you too, Alex.
The bottom row of Google Plus Hangout with me. So my entrepreneurial journey actually starts because I grew up in a very unique time and place. So I grew up in the heart of the Silicon Valley, right in the middle of the dot-com boom and the subsequent dot-com bust. So surrounded by lots of really good startups, Facebook, Google, lots of really terrible startups, but a real entrepreneurial sort of mindset throughout the Silicon Valley. Unlike most people that live somewhere else and then go to Silicon Valley, I actually went the opposite way. So I went out to Washington, D.C. because I was really passionate about education policy at that point. But then between my first and second year of graduate school, where I was studying public policy, I had a chance to go live in India for a while. So I was living in India. I was traveling as much as I could, also volunteering with the social enterprise, working with girls, teaching them ultimate frisbee. But really, ultimate frisbee is a means to teach them about female empowerment, developing habits, that kind of thing. And there I sort of had this first realization that, look, fundamental social change won't come from one or two huge organizations. It's going to come from lots of people pursuing their own version of social good, their own version of this Ahmedabad girls frisbee club. So that's sort of the first point where I realized that I had this sort of entrepreneurial interest, but never knew exactly towards what end. And that's where I realized the impact of fusing social impact with traditional entrepreneurship. So at that point, I came back to the States. I wanted to start my own social enterprise, which was similarly aimed at using sport for youth development. I didn't really know how to get started, like how to get that initial capital I needed, how to get that initial group of supporters who would be with me. So the more I thought about it, the more I realized, well, hey, I have what I think is a good idea. Don't know how to get off the ground. How many other great ideas must there be? But just never go from that idea stage to actually taking action. So it was at that point that I thought about what kind of barriers exist to starting good, and we'll talk about all those things today, really recognizing that there's need for financial capital, intellectual capital, knowing actually what to do, business plans, and social capital, resources, relationships, people to be with you for that entrepreneurial ride. But recognizing that one of the real missing links was this financial capital piece, that entrepreneurs are incredibly resourceful, but sometimes it just takes a couple $1,000s to be able to start the initial project, actually get things going. So we realized, well, hey, there's a better way to get that initial capital, and that grew into StartSomeGood, where we are now.
Fantastic, beautiful story. Thank you, Alex. Kalsoom?
Yeah, great. So I also kind of had this interesting trajectory to how I launched Invest to Innovate and kind of went into this foray of social entrepreneurship. Despite my American accent, I actually grew up in Pakistan, and I went to international schools overseas my whole life. And so as a young Pakistani, I was always really passionate about doing things that were for my country and actually like supporting young people and things like that. But I actually went to grad school for international relations. That's why I first moved to DC. I thought I was going to go down the more traditional policy route, and that was going to be my contribution in focusing on research and analysis. And I worked in defense contracting, so completely the opposite of what I'm doing now. And I basically I started working in philanthropy, and I was really interested in innovative approaches to philanthropy and how it can actually support entrepreneurs when they're first starting out, but also how the more traditional charity model wasn't really working in a lot of these environments. I was seeing a big gap between traditional charity and traditional NGOs that weren't sustainable because they were always looking for money. Versus like actual poverty alleviation. And when I started to get exposed to social enterprises that I really respected, I became really interested in why social enterprise or why entrepreneurship just generally was very vibrant in some markets and not others. And I saw a big gap between investment capital and impact investment, which is something we'll probably talk about today, and seed capital, like what Alex works on, versus entrepreneurs that can really receive that. And so for me, we actually see a lot of activity that exists. You'll see a lot of social enterprises that are popping up in an ecosystem in East Africa, in Mexico, Latin America, and in India. And so in places like Pakistan, which is where I'm from, it's 2/3 of the country are under 30 years old, and 60% of the country has under $2 a day. Which means that they're at the bottom of the pyramid, they're very low income. And so how can we actually address the fact that we have a huge young population that wants to really address the issues around them versus the fact that we also have like a tremendous amount of poverty that still exists. And I'm really passionate about not only entrepreneurial solutions to poverty and how being sustainable, but really thinking about impact-driven businesses versus profit-driven businesses can really make an impact, but also how are we actually building an environment that supports entrepreneurs. And that's really where Invest to Innovate came around. I decided to start in Pakistan because that's where I'm from, but the vision for Eye to Eye is to work in new markets. We're aiming to potentially go to Tunisia or Bangladesh next. But what we do is we identify early stage enterprises. So really kind of addressing that similar gap that Alex is talking about with StartSomeGood, which is an amazing organization, also one of my favorites in the space, but really looking at identifying early stage social enterprises that have a lot of potential for change, a lot of potential for growth, providing them business support and capacity building support through our accelerator program, which we just piloted and just finished it this past January. But selecting them, putting them through a program where they're exposed to amazing mentors that are local, that understand the context with that these entrepreneurs are working in, and then connect them to seed capital at the end. So at the end of our first pilot that just happened, our 5 entrepreneurs that were part of the pilot actually all pitched for seed capital to a room of investors in Lahore. But what we aim to do is also support the stakeholders that are in the space. How are we supporting university incubators that are coming up? How are we supporting corporations that are looking at more innovative approaches to solving these big global issues? And for me, that's really eye to eye. It's like, how do we actually really get innovation on a big level? How do we actually take a bigger approach to supporting entrepreneurs?
And actually, it's fascinating because what I'm hearing in both of your responses is that to become a social entrepreneur is really much of a personal journey. You see different things, you see what resonates with you, what you respond to. It can be connected with your traveling, your life, where you're coming from, whatever needs that you have observed that the world is struggling with. And then what I always find fascinating is that once you reflect on all of these things that ultimately drive you to start a social enterprise, how have you been able to distill from all of these different things the one idea that's, okay, say, what I'm going to do is start some good, or what I'm going to do is my company invest to innovate. What was the first point when you said, okay, from all the options, all the things I could do, this is the one idea, and this is the first step I'm going to take to develop it?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Nadia, I mean, talking about it being sort of a journey, I think most entrepreneurs are constantly having these ideas in their head. You're constantly thinking, well, I should just open up a Greek restaurant, or hey, I should just sew this. But we always have these ideas. That's a pretty normal thing. But there's something to an idea. A lot of these ideas are fleeting, but sometimes there's an idea that just kind of sticks with you, right? It's with you when you go to sleep. It's with you when you wake up in the morning, when you're in the shower, you're thinking about it. So I don't think there's anything more to it, at least for me, other than that this idea just kept sticking with me, that I would pass on other ideas. This one kept feeling like something to do, and eventually it's just kind of trusting my gut, thinking, well, hey, I think this is something we should be pursuing.
Totally. I also think it's a commentary on our generation. I think that data that's been shown about the millennial generation is that that we're very aware about our surroundings. We're very aware about the interconnectedness of the world, and trying to do something to actually change that. So not necessarily going maybe the traditional business route, but really thinking about what our impact is. What kind of meaning are we really bringing into the world? And for me, it was actually interesting because I knew I was going to start something. I knew I was going to start some good. But sorry, I couldn't resist. But I didn't know what it was going to be. I knew it was probably going to be, I thought it was going to be a fund originally because I really was kind of obsessed with this idea that why there weren't investors that were really addressing early stage enterprises. Like a lot of people were looking at entrepreneurs when they were ready to grow, but not when they were ready to start. And what I did for an entire year before I started Eye to Eye was I just literally had coffee with anyone that would meet with me. Just to like throw my idea around, people that I really respected and got feedback. And the first thing I learned was they were like, oh, you want to start a fund? Do you have any experience in finance? I'm like, well, I'm horrible in finance. And they're like, well, why would you start a fund? I'm like, that's true. Like, why would I start a fund? And I think the number one advice that I got, which is kind of what led me onto the path of Eye to Eye, was take what you're really good at, what are you really passionate about. And I was really, really good at making connections, and I was really good at like figuring out what people really needed and delivering them the solution to get them there. And that's really where Eye to Eye came, and it was from a very simple observation about myself. And I think you have to build a business around what you love, because that's going to be your blood, sweat, and tears. You're going to be pulling your hair out at 4 o'clock in the morning. You're not going to have any money. Entrepreneurs sometimes is like, sometimes it's a really cool thing, and sometimes it's code word for unemployed. And so you have to really know that this is what you're going to do. And so I think you have to build a business around what you love in order to really get there.
I love that point because, in a way, when I'm talking to entrepreneurs as well, what I see is that the most successful ones, they bring in the passion, but Kalsoom, what you also said is that they bring in the ability, right, the skill, some of the things that they are very, very good at. For example, I started right out of Goldman Sachs. I started a technology company. I had no idea how to run a technology company, but it was when Apple launched the App Store. So I thought, well, what a great opportunity. But again, like you said, I didn't have the skill. I didn't have the technical skill, and ended up suffering because of that. Because it was interesting, but I needed to find the skill somewhere else. So if you can find the passion and what you're good at, or what your team is good at,
right.
It can be a beautiful thing.
Yeah, and I think it's also being aware of, just to add on to that, I think it's also being aware of what you don't know. So saying like, I know how to do this, but I don't know, I'm not very strong on finance, or I'm not very strong on like investment strategy. So I'm going to hire someone, I'm going to bring someone onto my team that can pull in what I don't know and the skill set that I don't have. And that's really how you build a well-rounded, a well-rounded team, and really to be able to fulfill your vision.
So what about money? I mean, as a social entrepreneur, do you have to make any money?
Alex, go ahead.
Well, you can always raise funds on StartSomeGood.
Yeah.
But as far as when you think through, business models and how you approach things, there's nothing inherently wrong with being a nonprofit. I think there's more and more trend towards this idea that the profit isn't a bad thing. We always say that one of the least interesting things about what you're doing as a social entrepreneur is what your legal organizational status is. Whether you're a nonprofit, whether you're an unincorporated group, whether you're a for-profit, LLC, a B Corp, right? All these different things could be. what really matters most is your vision. And then how do you align your vision with the way that you give yourself the best chance of succeeding? So I think we see more and more that people are saying, well, hey, instead of having to rely on brand writing all the time, I can actually generate revenue myself. So whether you do this nonprofit or for-profit, the idea of becoming more self-sustaining, I think, is really important. But the bigger question that you ask is that in so much of traditional business, you're thinking about a single bottom line, just what is my profit and how do I absolutely maximize it? Whereas social entrepreneurs are balancing at least two bottom lines, impact and profit, potentially even more when you think about finance as well. But you're making a judgment call saying, well, hey, I want to make money. Maybe I don't want to make 100x returns. I want to make 50x returns and also have tremendous impact. So that's what's great about social entrepreneurship is that you now get to decide what is the right balance for you. So if you say, hey, the best thing I can do for this world is just to be an absolute purely profit-driven company, great, do that. But there's also a chance to say, well, hey, I care about both these things, and now there's ways to actually make both of those things valuable.
I think the difference, too, when we talk about what the difference is between, I'm not even a big fan of the word social entrepreneur because I think that it just kind of puts it in a box, and I think you should really be applying a lot of the same things to your business, regardless of if you're a social entrepreneur or you're an entrepreneur. But I think what's been kind of a delineation between the two is that when you're a social enterprise, you're impact driven. Like the intention behind why you started the business was impact. Versus sometimes when you're starting a more traditional business, it is more of that single bottom line, that more profit driven business. And so while you may not be, it is about, a lot of it's the legal thing too. So if you're a nonprofit social enterprise, your profits aren't going to go back to your shareholders. They're going to go recycled back into your programming. If you're a for-profit, it can go back that way too if you have investors for dividends for your shareholders that way. But if you think about the fact that every social enterprise should be really thinking about not only how are they making an impact, but how are they going to be sustainable? And that could be profit driven, that could be profits that are coming back into your business, or that could just be making sure that you stay afloat and that makes sure that you're paying off and you're constantly being sustainable. And so I think that type of thinking is something that should exist whether you're a nonprofit social enterprise or you're a for-profit social enterprise. You should be thinking about your revenue streams and how your business is actually going to be self-sustaining.
Fantastic, thank you very much. Another topic I wanted to touch on is execution, because what we often see is that young people have or entrepreneurs have many ideas, especially when they're doing something they're very passionate about. It's very easy almost to get stuck in this ideation phase in what could be and what visions we have, and kind of keep talking about it rather than doing. How do you keep yourselves disciplined and keep on executing so that when you look back 1 or 2 years from now, you can tell anyone, look, well, I'm just not talking about it. You can look at my results. Things are actually happening. And maybe the second part of the question would be, how do you do it individually, but also as a team? Because when you bring a team of people together, right, everyone has different expectations, different preferences, different ideas. How do you build consensus within a team so that execution really takes place?
Alex, you want to go first?
Sure. There's lots of good questions all wrapped up into that. Yeah. I think that the first thing is just valuing this idea of action. One thing that I want to mention right off the bat is that especially if you're thinking about becoming a social entrepreneur, you can never actually be ready to become an entrepreneur, right? There's no point where you'll go, okay, I've got my little entrepreneur's card, I'm ready to be an entrepreneur, go for it. You're never going to actually feel ready. There's going to be so many things that you don't know, but at some point you just have to sort of take that leap to just go for it. But ultimately, you can't do anything if all you do is think about things. And you can actually get stuck in this sort of paralysis by thinking about things too much. And this is where the idea of sort of best practice business principles are really important. So I often talk a lot about what's called the lean startup, which is all about thinking about what's the minimum I need to do to get something out there to test and see, do people actually want what I'm offering? Because so often people will build up this big thing in their head where their idea ends up becoming this gigantic, complicated thing, and they don't even know if there's a single person that wants it. So I definitely recommend the idea of starting small. So rather than saying, hey, I want to be in 1,000 schools, well, why don't you start with one school, see how that one school works, and then go from there. And that's where the future execution starts. But I think that there's a big mental block between the idea of having to scale right away. But instead think about, well, how can I just get started at a simple minimum viable product and then go from there?
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I think that Also, I think something that's a very classic entrepreneurial thing is to be an action-oriented person anyway. So I think we can sit there and ideate and think about all these different ways that things could go wrong, but unless you just start, you won't be able to know what works and what doesn't work. And I think that's I mean, when I launched Eye to Eye, I remember like I had thought about it for a year. Like I was like building it up in my head. I made like a deadline. I'm leaving my job full time to like go full time on Eye to Eye. And the minute I started, everything went wrong. I was like, oh, like all these assumptions that I made, it's like doesn't make sense at all. And so and it wasn't until I started that I was able to really see that. And then I was able to, I mean, it's a very big buzzword term, but I was able to pivot my model. I was able to change things and to, you know, recalibrate the way that I was thinking about things really quickly as a result of just starting. The other thing that you talked about with your team, Nadia, about how you actually get consensus, I think it actually goes back to like how are you bringing people on too, right? Like you don't want to bring your team on that are your yes people, right? That people that just agree with you, but you want people that you know disagree, that challenge you, that are constantly making you think, rethink things. But at the same time, you're also hiring people based on the values of your company. Like if you think about your company and you think about the values that encompass you, those are the values that encompass like internally as well. And so ideally, you're hiring people that are as willing to take the risk, that are as excited to try things, that are doing things as well. And so you just have to make people feel empowered enough to know that if they have a really great idea, you're willing to and it's good enough to try, just try it. And that's also how you get buy-in from your team too, I think, for the future.
Great, fantastic. Can you guys comment a little bit on if you had to mention three things that are critical to make it or break it as a social entrepreneur, what would be those three things? And I know there are many, many, but if you just had to say three things, you either do this, you're in, or if you don't do it, you're out. What would those three things be?
Three things I would say: persistence, humility, and sleep. So persistence, because entrepreneurship is tough. Like Kalsoom said, you know, oftentimes you think it's really sexy when you get to be Mark Zuckerberg wearing a hoodie and ringing the NASDAQ bell. But actually, it's a lot of really unglamorous stuff that happens, lots of ups and downs. So I think number one is persistence. And as you are persistent, you know, there's kind of a stubbornness to it. But what's important is to be really humble the whole time and have this humility to learn from others, to admit your mistakes, to be the kind of leader that other people want to go behind. Right? So you have to have this absolute belief that you can make it happen, but still be humble enough to admit you're wrong and change course. And then I say sleep just because entrepreneurs tend to not take care of ourselves well at all. And so whether that means whatever it is that you should do but you don't do, whether that's sleep or work out or eat well or whatever it is, there's so much pressure to not take care of yourself, and I'm guilty of this too. But you know, make sure that you're taking care of yourself while you're trying to do the world.
I totally agree with that. I think that a lot of times people feel like they have to kill themselves for the cause because they want to be this like Mother Teresa behind their cause and this, you know, martyr behind it. But at the end of the day, like if you're not taking care of yourself, then you're not really going to be able to fulfill the vision of what you're trying to do. You're going to be, and I'm also completely guilty of that. There'll be weeks where I'm on the road traveling and I really feel like I'm about to burn out. And I think you need to be able to say, like, I'm okay going to bed at like 10 o'clock today and not working till 2 or 3 in the morning. Another big thing that I would just add on to that, because I completely agree with what Alex said, but I also say just being curious still. I think that your model is never going to stay the same, and I think the minute you think that your model is done, it means you're failing. You can't be static. Everything is fluid. Everything is dynamic, and so just being curious, always asking yourself, you know, always pushing yourself, always thinking about big questions, and also remembering that your model is going to be flexible based on your customer base. If you're working in food security, as an example, and you're working with small farmers, your customers are always going to be changing their preferences. You're always going to be thinking about how you can improve your product, how you can improve your product offering, and so just being open to the fact that things are going to change and be flexible to keep moving things, in my opinion, in order to make it better. That would be one of the other advice that I have.
Fantastic. So maybe to conclude this hangout, my final question to you guys would be, you know, obviously the topic that students are working towards handling with Thought for Food, which is how are we going to feed the world's 9 billion people? It's a huge, huge topic, and you could approach it from every possible angle. So what specific advice would you give to students as they are looking at this big question on their computer screen? And reflecting on who they are, what they're passionate about, what sort of skills they can bring into the picture. what advice would you give them to really create out-of-the-box ideas that are going to help change the world?
Um, I can go first. I think that the big thing first is it is a really big question. I mean, obviously, to get all the millions of people that aren't being fed, it's a big question. But I would think about it first in a very personal way. Think about your local community. Think about people that are around you, because the minute you can start narrowing down the question to something that you feel personally connected to, that's when you're really going to come up with an idea that makes sense, that resonates with people around you and resonates with your community as well. So whether that means if you work in a city that has a lot of homelessness and there's people that are poor and starving on the street, if you're really interested in innovations in agriculture or energy and thinking about how biogas can actually support and fuel things, like just think about where you come from, who you are, and really start from that question first, and don't really think about the big question, because sometimes it can feel very overwhelming, and just think about like you within your personal context, like what can you do, and then go from there.
Right on, Kelsey. I mean, food is a huge issue that touches so many things, so there's lots of ways to approach it. So another thing I'll add is take a look at Robert Ager, who's one of my very favorite social entrepreneurs, and he does something called the DC Central Kitchen. He's taken a very innovative approach to food, very holistic view in terms of working with local farmers, working with the foodless population. So look at what he's done. I think is an inspiration for the different ways that one can address food in the ways that so much of it is all interconnected.
Great. Thank you guys very much. I really appreciate your time. And at this point, I would love to hand it over back to Christine. Christine?
Thank you, Nadia.
Yeah, I just want to reiterate thanks to all of you. This was an amazing session. I learned a lot, had goosebumps at several points. I think everyone who watches this video will definitely walk away inspired and with some really tangible ideas and insights that they can use as they develop their projects. And for all of you who are watching this video, you have seen, hopefully on our website by now, that we have a great lineup of all-star mentors that you can connect with along the way. Hopefully this gave you some food for thought for food. And if you have further questions or need any help on anything, that's what we're all here for. So reach out to us, ask any questions. We're here anytime, day or night, to help you in your journey to make an impact on the world. So thanks again to all of our speakers and to our moderator. And look forward to our further conversations. And all of you out there, stay tuned for more Google Hangouts in the next coming weeks. Have a great day.